Welcome. Great to see people. My name's Amy Antonucci. I am the New Hampshire Peace Action Education Fund board chair, and I'm really glad to welcome you to our Peace and Justice series online for Monday, February 23rd, 2026. Tonight, we're really excited to have with us Owen Madaus. Did I do it right?
Nailed it.
He's going to be speaking with us about a rising generation of peace activists, of which he is one of. I'll give you a little background here, though. First, looking backwards, for over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more just and peaceful future for all. We do our work here in New Hampshire on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples, past and present. Quick reminder on Zoom etiquette. We ask that you will be muted and unable to unmute for the first part of the conversation. We're happy for you to have your video on if you would like. And later we'll go to, the discussion part, and then we particularly like it when you have your video on, and we'll do hand raising as well as using the chat, pulling questions out of the chat. So with all that said, let me introduce to you our speaker for tonight. I actually was connected to Owen through another good friend of ours, Joseph Gerson, who has had rave reviews about Owen's work. Owen has a master's degree in conflict resolution and coexistence with experience in peace building, advocacy, and community-based development. He led the organizing for Boston's Hiroshima and Nagasaki 80th anniversary commemorations. He's also a former Peace Corps volunteer, and he continues on the board with for the campaign for peace, disarmament, and common security. He also lives down in Rhode Island. He's joining us from Rhode Island, where they just had a record-breaking amount of snow. So as I said earlier, we are really feeling grateful that power and internet and such are coming together, that we can be here and hear from Owen. And please join me in visibly welcoming him.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Are you guys able to see that?
Not yet. There it is. Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, again, thank you for having me. I hope everyone's staying warm if you're facing a blizzard. Yeah, my name's Owen Madaus, and today I want to discuss some of why the many crises that we're facing, ranging from wealth inequality to authoritarianism, war, and climate destruction, are not entirely separate issues, but they're features of a system that we exist within. So I'm very interested in these systems and not just focusing on symptoms. So I want to briefly cover how we got here, going from briefly colonialism all the way to the modern system, and then talk about what I think a shift would actually require, including democratic structures, common security framing, coalitions, and narrative ownership. So yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and jump in. So there's a very long history of minoritizing and exploitive systems, from slavery, feudalism, caste, colonialism, to capitalism. And to understand our modern system, I want to contextualize it within colonialism. So for 500 years, there was resource and land theft in the Americas, abroad too, of course. And for colonialism to work, the colonies had to be kept in a state of dependency. So to do this, they destroyed local industry, subsistence farming, and local belief systems and traditional practices. And then they replaced it with monoculture, the exportation of raw materials, and they made them dependent on colonial powers. So it wasn't just about theft, but it was about the engineering of dependency. And then that eventually transitioned into neocolonialism. So once states were able to achieve decolonization, they entered this new phase that we call neocolonialism, where as they entered the economic order, they had to take on debt and policies that favored the global north, such as the privatization of public assets, cuts to education and health programs, and they entered the free market, which meant that they were competing against heavily subsidized and already wealthy global north nations. So it really was the same extractive system, just now within the economic system rather than in material, tangible colonies. And we can really see the same system existing today in a number of ways. So, more than 40% of the world's population live in countries that spend more on debt, interest payments, than on health or education, even though they've paid back that initial loan many, many times over. And so there's the notion that the global north is assisting poorer countries, when really it's the global south that's financing the global north. And, it should also be noted that the US has a long history of utilizing violence to maintain this economic order and this system of dependence. Um, One example would be Guatemala in the 1940s. Or also in Chile, they were democratically elected presidents that wanted to do land reform, nationalize public industries, and that led to the US intervening via coup and civil war, dictators, and a lot of violence to maintain that same system. And even our foreign aid can be a act of dependency. Um, Also, it's often framed very positively, and it largely is. The US provided $63 billion in foreign aid in 2023, but that kind of pales in comparison to the 238 billion that they made in arms sales that same year. And this is also before the elimination of USAID, all the other things that have happened this year, cuts to UN funding, withdrawal from the WHO. So that disparity has really only grown. And even well-intentioned acts of aid can perpetuate this system of dependency. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the company Tom's Shoes, but they used to have a promotion where every pair of shoes you buy, a community in need gets a free pair of shoes. And it sounds like a great idea, and it was very well intentioned. But as that plays out, a truck comes into a community filled to the brim with free shoes, and it's great. But how does that impact the shoemaker in that community? Nobody wants to buy shoes if they can get them for free. So eventually he has to close up shop, his business closes, and then they're dependent on this truck coming, which is unreliable. They don't know when it will. And eventually the company decides to go to another community in need. There's no longer the same need for shoes. And so they became dependent and it disrupted their economy. And this same trend can happen. Another example would be in Haiti in the 1980s. The US started to export their rice into Haiti, and it was heavily subsidized in the US. And so it was great for US rice farmers, but Haitian rice farmers couldn't compete with heavily subsidized US rice flooding the market. So they had to sell their farms, move into cities, and it only increased poverty. So aid can often be used as a tool of foreign policy rather than a humanitarian good. And it's important that we fight for aid to be something that's building capacity and building local development rather than dependence. And just from my own experience, I will say that is something that I think the Peace Corps does very well. They really stress that any projects have to be led by community members and that it's actually, desired by the community and that there's a community member that will want to continue it after you leave. Because they recognize that, volunteers are there for a short time. And if you want to actually have a prolonged impact and something sustainable, it has to be desired and led by the community. I was gonna include a picture of myself from the Peace Corps here, and I put it in, and then I realized it has the heading Neo-colonialism today, so I decided to take it out. Um, but yeah, now moving on to, our modern system along with that is how capitalism fuels crisis. So capitalism is dependent on labor, and it's always going to be trying to find the cheapest form of labor. So it's going to externalize costs, consolidate industry, and maximize profit any chance it gets. And a lot of these interests are contrary to the public good. And if not regulated, they can lead to monopolies, wealth inequality, democratic decline, instability, and conflict. And each of those then multiply onto the next, fueling the cycle. And the global system is really designed to protect these corporate interests right now and ensure that there's, a class of impoverished people dependent on providing labor. And so our current system has led to wealth inequality increasing year after year in the US. And there's 24,000 at least poverty-related deaths per day globally. And, this wealth inequality is just constantly expanding poverty. And along with that, higher levels of wealth inequality are an accurate predictor for state violence and unrest. So I like to kind of think of it in terms of MLK's famous quote about injustice, where instability anywhere is a threat to stability everywhere. Because poverty and its resulting instability fuel crime, migration, conflict, and put further strain on all our other systems. And increased wealth inequality also contributes to democratic backsliding, partly in because in times of scarcity and insecurity, people are more likely to be appealed to the strongman authoritarian archetype. You know, how Putin is pictured often riding a bear, or how Trump likes to picture himself in AI tweets. But also because this huge concentration of industry and capital are able to dictate policy, which then only helps itself and it erodes our democracy, which I think is really becoming clearer every day. So these systems are fueling all of these issues that then, interlock and fuel each other. And along with these, larger financial and dependent systems, I think there's a contributing ideology of realism, which is it's a political science idea. And it's basically, I'm in Providence. If I'm under attack, I'll call 911. Someone will intervene. But that same overarching power intervening doesn't exist on the global stage. So the idea is everyone's acting in their own self-interest, and the only way to be safe is through having more power and more control over someone else. So the idea is security through domination. And I think a good example of how this mindset has kind of spiraled out of control is the current state of nuclear weapons. One single modern nuclear bomb could kill over 1 million people, and 100 could cause a nuclear winter, which is essentially a world-ending event. Yet today we have over 12,000 nuclear weapons spread across the globe. So the belief that security can only come through military might has led us to have all these nuclear weapons and a near $1 trillion military budget, which comes at the cost of investments in human needs, things that would actually protect us. So instead, I prefer the ideology of common security, which focuses on interdependence, cooperation, and collective action to resolve issues. It follows the idea that if other countries are secure, then your own country will become more secure. The same idea of insecurity anywhere is a threat to, or instability everywhere. Um, and, diplomacy is more effective than war, and it's definitely more cost effective, let alone, of course, the moral and the toll of human life that's involved in war. And I think it also makes sense considering just the logic of negotiation. Once, like, I took a class on negotiation, and they really say that it's, people have their initial positions, but the goal is to understand the underlying interests behind those positions and then find the commonality and work within it So negotiation is really much more a practice of cooperation than it is, domination. The idea of, scamming someone, of sharks, it's not really how negotiation works. It's much more about cooperation. And that's how I think, or at least how I'd like to see our international politics play out, where security is achieved through cooperation rather than competition and domination. But even treaties are not enough. For common security to last, it has to exist in relationships as well as, those binding treaties. And that's where I want to distinguish between peacemaking and peace building. Peacemaking is focused on the cessation of violence, and peace building is about creating the conditions to prevent future conflict. So, peace building is about relationships, inclusion, representation, shared ownership of power, and access into that power. So, we also know that when women are substantively involved in peace agreements, the probability of an agreement lasting at least 2 years increases by 20%, and the likelihood of it lasting at least 15 years increases by 35%. And including civil society actors reduces the risks of agreements breaking down by 64%. So the more inclusive a peace deal is, the more likely it is to succeed and the more likely it is to last. And it makes sense. Broader representation means broader needs are addressed and more nuanced and comprehensive plans are enacted. It also creates local ownership and community buy-in, so it becomes more sustainable. So, despite the rhetoric that, we're often hearing from this administration, diversity is a huge asset and it needs to be represented in the halls of power. So, the goal of peace building is to strengthen community relationships, promote shared understanding and interdependence, and create inclusive power structures. So, I really see it tied into the idea of common security, where realism is focused on concentrating power to then dominate and influence others. Peace building is about distributing it. And then I see democracy as the structural redistribution of power. So the goals of peace building are all vital components of any successful democracy. And democracy is a way to then achieve those goals as a positive, feedback loop. And it's also really crucial, democracy is, to addressing the systemic and structural issues that I was discussing earlier. Uh, Successful democracy has the potential to craft regulations, bust monopolies, create and protect public assets, and create mutually beneficial agreements. And the democratization of decision making can address the conflicting interests inherent to capitalism, or at least partially. Um, so I see democracy as incredibly important and as a path forward. And along with that, I see intersectional coalitions as incredibly important. We know that the most pressing issues are systemic and that they exacerbate one another. Economic injustice connects to the climate, and the climate connects to migration. Migration connects to labor. They're all interconnected. So it's important that the actions to resolve them are unified. Fragmented movements compete for attention, but coalitions can unify a message and coordinate pressure. And coordinating across movements can also help protect people that face multiple injustices. And by addressing policies that protect the most vulnerable, we end up protecting everyone. And we're also more likely to get to the root cause of those issues and those injustices. So, one example of coalition work that I'm engaged in is the Books Not Bombs Committee. We've seen recently public and higher education be politicized, defunded, used as leverage. We've seen the gutting of the Department of Education, the withholding of appropriated funds, crackdowns on student protests, and surveillance and control of classrooms is increasing. And it's a threat not just to students currently, but our democracy, our economy. I mean, really all aspects of society depend on education. And so the Books Not Bombs Committee was originally created to focus on the connection between the military budget and the underfunding of public education, but it's kind of expanded into just raising awareness about the ongoing attacks on education at all levels. And so we've been holding webinars and teach-ins to mobilize people around these issues, primarily for May Day and then for the midterms in 2026 this year. And before, you wouldn't see broad coordination across organizations like the American Association of University Professors or the Mass Teachers Association or the AFT or different student activist groups. They're different audiences, different levels of education, but that's rapidly changing. The range of attacks demands a broad coalition, and we're seeing groups align around defending education and democracy in ways that weren't happening, even a year ago. And we're even seeing like the involvement of immigrant right groups, the ACLU, different peace activists are coming to our teach-ins and talking. So it's a small scale example, but I think it represents a larger trend of coalition building, especially intersectional coalition building across different movements and backgrounds. And I think we're seeing this increased organized coalition resistance and solidarity around the world. I think the No Kings protests are a good example. I also think of the global Sumud flotilla that was distributing aid to Gaza. And then what's going on in Minneapolis? There's massive coordination across all aspects of society there. They're talking about a possible general strike. So I think we're seeing this coalition, um, you know, this work across coalitions and this combining of movements is really coming together. And that is one cause for hope, I think, and one bright side to the just unrelenting attack on so many different sectors of society. And so, along with coalitions, I want to bring in the idea of narratives as a way to also further these movements. Um, Democracy and coalitions, they're structural power, but narratives are a form of cultural power, and they are power. Systems are maintained not just by policy, but by stories, and those stories reflect certain values. So, our large military keeps us safe. Inequality is due to merit and work ethic. Those narratives justify certain policies. They justify the status quo in a way. And so, owning our narratives and reclaiming them to reflect the interests of our communities is a really powerful way to change, I mean, I don't want to use the word narrative too much, but to change people's ideas and reflect those same values in a different way. And you can also, you know, see the values that are important to someone and frame a narrative in a way that will speak to them more. If, they're opposed to monopoly busting, because they think it's unfair to that corporation, you can then frame it instead as a form of market competition. And another way to utilize narratives is the sharing of personal narratives and testimonies. And it brings like a level of imagery and personal anecdote that can be very powerful and moving. And it helps people understand things that they wouldn't otherwise. And then sharing those narratives can increase awareness and hopefully foster dialogue and improve relations in some way. So, to conclude, I want to share an analogy that I find especially insightful, known as the miner's canary. For those that don't know, miners used to bring canaries into the mines with them. The canary has a weaker respiratory system, so once it collapses, the miners knew there was toxic gas and they would need to leave immediately. So, in the analogy, the canary represents the most vulnerable groups of people, and they're an indicator for the danger that will eventually affect us all. So, for example, the treatment of immigrants at the border and the increasing militarization there should have been an indicator that we could be facing increased militarization domestically. And we're now seeing that play out with ICE. And marginalized populations, they're the easiest to exploit, but exploitation never ends there. So those most vulnerable populations are the canaries in the coal mine. I also think it's interesting to think about whether our policy solutions are working to help the canary live in a toxic mine or if they're trying to change the conditions of the mine. So, for example, as more people are experiencing homelessness, our politicians decide to open more shelters. It's helpful, but it's kind of like putting a gas mask on a canary to help them live in the mine. Instead, they should be, or in addition, they should be trying to ventilate the mine by addressing poverty, mental health, or other structures causing homelessness, the root cause of the issue, the actual toxic gas. So, by protecting the canaries, we're able to prevent injustices that will eventually affect the rest of us. And by addressing the root cause, we move from managing harm to ending sources of injustice. So, the goal is to address the structures that perpetuate the crises we're facing. I believe democratization, common security framing, coalition building, and the use of narratives are a way to work towards addressing the gas in the mine. And I'll end it there.
Thank you, Owen. Great. And we can get into conversation and discussion now. Folks can put messages in the chat, and we'll also take hands. I have a couple questions that I'll start jumping in on as people start working on their own, and I hope you see of course, you see all those happy
Thank
reactions.
you.
Great. So the first thing I want to say is how impressive you are, okay? And not just you, I have met other younger folks. I don't know exactly how we define some of these things, but well, even having worked with both high school and college students in the past couple of years, I have been very impressed with their framing of some of the situations happening in the world. And all of them talked about things like colonialism and capitalism, and they just seem to have a grasp like you do. And I wonder, is that common? Have I just stumbled upon particularly well-formed younger folks, or is that common these days? What's your experience?
I think it is increasingly common. Just class consciousness in general. I'll say what initially sparked me was in 2016 is when I first started getting into politics. I was 16, and climate change was the issue that, I mean, and it still is, was the issue that was just burning a hole in me. How is everyone not upset about this? And I remember watching the Democratic, um, oh my God, I'm blanking on the word, to, elect their delegate. And Bernie Sanders was the only one that would talk about climate change. And I just thought, what is going on? How the facts are there? How is everyone not outraged about this? And then that got me interested in money and politics, and then it just expanded into how all these different issues play into each other, and it just became a very focused passion of mine. And I think, the youth, they're just getting enraged by different issues, including climate change and Gaza, and I think it's becoming easier to draw the links between it, um, especially as we see billionaires talk kind of more blatantly about their interests as well.
Well, that's nice to hear. It's not unusual to hear from, but where are the youth and don't the youth care and things like that. And I think maybe those of us saying that aren't hanging out with that much that many young people, and that's why we don't understand that they are actually more conscientious and connected than we maybe fear.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I
really
will say it could be partly my circles or regional too. So I can't speak for everything. But yeah, I have also noticed the lack of, I was with Mass Peace Action. Youth are very engaged on social media, but not always in person.
Well, that is another question that I want to ask. I think, and especially because you're talking about intersectionality and diversity, and I do think there is a separation often between generations. And, the peace movement has had more older folks, and the environmental movement, the climate justice has had a lot more younger folks. And do you have thoughts on how to bridge some of those gaps? I mean, it's not always bad to have different people working on different things, but because of our understanding of the importance of diversity, do you see ways to have at least a little more bridging?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. I guess I would say I think there's a lot of young people involved in climate movements. And so I think connecting into climate groups, any chance you get to collaborate with them or have them speak at a webinar would probably attract more young people. Also like the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, have a lot of young people and they're very politically active. So I think drawing on those groups might help bring them more into the fold. But yeah, I don't know. It definitely is a challenge.
Thanks. I am going to keep an eye on the chat. I have, so, or you can hand raise if you want to ask a question. I'll keep going through my list meanwhile. So I do want to ask a little more around the capitalist lens, or maybe we would call it the anti-capitalist lens. Are you looking to specific, and I will admit to having my own ideas on this, but I'm interested in yours about what would be um, better. Like, are you, in your mind, do we need a very specific other type of economy, or, how do you see us addressing the economics? Is it, yeah, good enough. Go ahead. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you the problem. I don't know if I can tell you the solution, kind of with capitalism. Um, and I think there's probably multiple possible solutions. I would say definitely money out of politics is extremely important. Getting, corporate PAC money out and stock trading and all of that. Ending corruption within our democracy, I think would have profound positive impacts on nearly everything else. Um, but then yeah, like the core capitalist issues, I think, maybe workers, companies could have where workers are bought into their shares. They own part of the company so that the wealth is distributed. Um, maybe, there's a cap between the lowest worker's wage and the highest paid, salaried employee so that it's proportional. It can only, be so different to help stall wealth inequality. Um, I think having workers, at least one labor representative on boards could do a lot. So yeah, and then also at the very least we need some like social programs so that to just help ease the extreme poverty and wealth inequality that's going on. But that won't change the actual ongoing system. So yeah, I don't know if I truly have a real solution, but I think there's people smarter than me and then there's a lot of things that we could try. But at a bare minimum, we have to protect our democracy and not let, corporate interests dictate all other interests for us. Because when you don't have a functioning government or when it functions for the interests of corporates or corporations, everything else falls apart.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to start calling on others. Can you define what democracy means to you when you use that word? Can you give us like a vision of what you see?
Um, yeah, I mean, just individuals having decision-making power. And I think it could, work in different settings, different ways. Like on a grand national level, I think representative democracy makes sense. Electing someone that then votes for your interests and should be responsive to you. And then there's some settings where, direct democracy where one person, one vote makes more sense. But I think the idea behind it is just collective decision making, where power is not so concentrated.
Great, thank you. I'm going to have Donna go next.
Owen, thank you so much for this fantastic presentation. I'm really blown away by your analysis. I teach graduate school, and I might be in touch with you about the possibility of coming into one of my classes, actually. And this is really important information. I'm wondering when you are talking with others, I struggle with this myself, and so I'm looking to hear your ideas about how to talk with people across political viewpoints and to reach some common ground, with the possibility even that people will begin to see the incredible logic and importance of what you just laid out. Um, so if you have ideas on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's definitely tricky.
Yeah.
I think part of it is just trying to understand what value they hold dear. Um, like their anti-immigrant sentiment maybe. And that comes from a idea of security. They feel like their security is threatened. So then I think shaping the conversation around how immigrants actually provide to the community and actually are less likely to commit crimes and how they improve our society, make you safer, kind of those ideas of common security, I think could maybe have an impact. And then it's challenging, but I think sharing personal testimony, however, introducing them to a friend that has some lived experience, or I think either getting into that core human emotion can be really impactful, or framing it in a way that matches what values they're concerned about, can be effective. But yeah, it is very divisive right now, so it's definitely a huge challenge.
Okay, I'm going to ask this one next. I'm not going to use names. Building on, you just mentioned immigration. It's a big issue right now. Uh, there's actually multiple things happening in New Hampshire right now that are really intense. But here's someone wanting your thoughts. I'm not sure you're going to specifically answer the exact question, but I'm going to put out what was said and you can react. So this person is saying, I'm an immigrant and I'm afraid of ICE. I haven't filed all my papers yet. Should I be fleeing back to where I came from? I won't use that. Or should I be sticking it out? And also how frightening the SAVE Act is, which will make it very hard for immigrants to vote. So your thoughts and reflections on this narrative, this personal testimony we have here, someone with us who is facing, you know, the horrific situation that is unfolding around us. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that you have to go through that, Greg. It is really sad that that is the situation that so many people are in. I don't think I can really give an answer on if you should stick it out or leave. Um, I hope you're able to stay, but yeah, I've had international friends that are very concerned, and some did. They were international students, so they were here for a short period of time and they had the ability, but they did leave. And then I have friends that have stayed and have been fine. Um, I think it is pretty uncommon for ICE to abduct people, but it does happen and it's unpredictable. So I don't want to give any guarantees or any concrete advice on that. But yeah, I'm sorry you have to go through that.
Thanks. Evelyn is asking your thoughts on a roadmap to eliminate nuclear weapons. stating that the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the treaty, TPNW treaty, and now I can't remember what it stands for.
The
Treaty to prevent nuclear weapons.
Prevent. Okay, thanks. Touch on it, but don't give a clear and detailed process. Nuclear states don't want to sign the TPNW without the guarantee the others will do the same. Do you have a thought of how to move this forward?
Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of got to the core issue where like NPT is good, but they haven't actually been following through on the disarmament, and it's kind of just stalled. And then the TPNW is great, but no nuclear armed states have actually ratified it and joined on. And they're all dependent on other nuclear armed states also joining it. And so I think the only solution is gonna be multilateral disarmament. You know, one of these nuclear armed states is never just gonna completely eliminate their nuclear weapons. It has to be joint disarmament. And I think that's possible because it's in common interests of all these states. I mean, these nuclear weapons could go off. There's been near accidental firings, and it's extremely dangerous, and it's in nobody's interest to actually launch and fire one and start a nuclear war. So I think it's completely nonsensical, and I think if they actually just sat down and had serious um, discussions about it, they could enter into multilateral disarmament. But then there's also, the military industrial complex that's profit driven and wants to produce weapons and keep tensions high to protect their industry. And I think that's having a major effect. But if we got good politicians in power, I think they could lead that. But ultimately, I think it's also going to take a strong and sustained social movement to force politicians to do that. So I think that's our best route, because it will have to be high level negotiation to get that multilateral disarmament. But I think the way to do that is from grassroots sustained pressure. So I know Back from the Brink is a great organization that is working on that. So I would suggest joining them, and let's try to make some sustained pressure. But yeah, it is a really daunting issue, and it does feel like these specific treaties have kind of stalled and aren't bringing about the results they should. I hope that answered your question.
New Hampshire Peace Action works with Back from the Brink.
Oh, great.
Yeah, very good organization doing really good work. Yeah, good advice. And I'm going to ask Moji to unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you, Amy. And hi, Owen. I love to see your young face. It makes me feel at age 60, almost 8, like your dad or granddad. And it's wonderful that you have the ability and the clear analysis that you have. One thing I want to say to the person who mentioned that he had not filed his papers as an immigrant, this person needs to go to their nearest Catholic church or any other immigration advice organization to be able to get the kind of advice that would be in his best interest. And that's a professional advice, if you will, as a human rights activist, which is part of my background. The thing that you mentioned, and then in the chat, I am also sending the link to a project I began on February 8 called National Peace and Democracy Coalition of Iran. And but I won't get into that. You may be interested. The thing that caused me to raise my hand was your wonderful recognition that we need, in my words, we need to have more organized compassion. We have different kinds of compassion, but we live in silos, or we do our work in silos. Therefore, we don't have the kind of numbers, the critical mass numbers in the old days, now 3.5%. And that initiative I called, and Amy and other folks here are familiar with it, chambers of compassion or intersectional circles, in contrast with chambers of commerce, so that we can have systemic collaboration across various civil society causes. My question to you is, to what extent are you able to say anything about how to communicate the importance of this kind of systemic collaboration and movement building? In other words, a movement of movements. To what extent are you able to communicate the importance of this to your generation? I know it's a big question, but you can also go into these links. And if you want to, you can. I would love to hear from you. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for your kind words, and I'm excited to look into this. Um, yeah, I guess, I mean, I think it makes sense just on like a basic logical level of working individually versus collectively. Um, Kind of like those statistics I was giving about how peace deals are so much more successful the more stakeholders represented and the more inclusive they are, the more people of different backgrounds. It just brings in a diversity of viewpoints that can just recognize different local contexts, more nuances, different grievances, and it just makes more comprehensive plans. And different people are able to speak to different people on different levels. I mean, it's just, you never know what exactly message is going to resonate with someone. Um, yeah, and I think back to I planned the commemoration event on Hiroshima Day this year in Boston. And I'm not personally religious, but we invited faith leaders there to discuss nuclear weapons. And it might not seem, directly related, but they were some of the absolute best speakers that were extremely profound and got a moral message that we just wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think all these different causes will speak and they just complement each other, let alone bringing in better perspectives. And then, also some people have different identities. They exist in the intersection of these different injustices. And so by bringing in these different movements, you help uplift those people in a way that just wouldn't be possible otherwise. And yeah, it amplifies the message and the movement. I hope that suffices.
Thanks. It also, New Hampshire Peace Action is leading a book study this winter on This is an Uprising by the Anglers. If anyone has not read it, we highly recommend it. And really, they're pointing out how sustained grassroots movements are the way we make a change. That, politicians do what they're forced to do by corporations or by people. And the examples are really impressive. And sometimes in the end, politicians want to take credit for it, but really it's us showing up and doing our work that changes the world. It really, really does. I wanted to take a step back to an earlier thing you were talking about in terms of the colonization and dealing with that narrative, that view of people in the world that I think we do still have a lot of. One thing I wondered, the whole idea of aid, I mean, I am all for helping people in a very careful way. As a small farmer, this is something that really upsets me when, going to a country, dumping food and putting their farmers out of business is so compounding of the problem. So it does need to be done carefully. But I also wonder about reframing that narrative from aid to, say, like reparations. Because most of the places that need aid need it because of the systems that other people in the world have imposed on them and sucked their wealth and their resources and out. So what do you think about that sort of reframing?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Um, I mean, these countries are, largely in these positions because of colonialism, and these states of dependency or economic exploitation that we've put them through. Um, and then I think the framing of aid is like we're good Samaritans helping them out. They're relying on us, or like they're so lucky to have our support. Or just America's so great. That it's kind of a connotation that can come with it sometimes. And yeah, I prefer to have it reframed as like capacity building, where instead of food supply, it's food security. It's a long-term plan that they have local ownership of, and it should all be collaborated with those local communities that are actually receiving it. And there should be an end plan to it as well. So yeah, I like that idea of reframing it. And I'm not opposed to aid, like Gaza, South Sudan, they need aid. It is crucial to survive, but it should always be planned in a way where it's not perpetual. It's not dependency. It's getting them back on their feet and, helping them create their own capacity to own their own food supply or whatever it may be. So yeah, I like that idea of reframing it.
Yeah, charity should never be come instead of justice. We do want to help each other out. There's nothing wrong with that. But to, I mean, this is part of what is so upsetting to watch in some places such as Gaza. We're fighting to get them food while bombs are dropping on them. And it's just, they were growing a lot of their own food before October 7th, and they were still hungry, but they had some really impressive systems going on. They're just gone now. So yeah, it can't
Yeah.
be a substitute for justice.
hmm It is, yeah, I do like the way you said it of reparations because it's the global north that put them in that position.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's see. Yeah, and also I have you been following the group that is on a peace delegation in Venezuela?
No, not really.
World Beyond War and Code Pink are two of the sponsors, and David Swanson just did a bunch of posting about it, and it was really interesting. And it made me realize that for all that I have been trying to follow, of course, it's sort of dropped out of the news. Like a lot of folks, I think, are thinking, wait, is something still happening with Venezuela? It's so, and I get it. There's so much coming at us. But even then, I had not really seen much reporting that talked to Venezuelans, like just walked around Caracas talking to Venezuelans. And that lack of the narrative to go back, I very much agree with you that stories are powerful and really more in line with how we think than facts. So I don't know. Do you have thoughts around Venezuela and how that fits into this model? Where what we're doing there might be also a part of this situation, this that you've outlined?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, for the narrative point, I totally agree with you. I think, narratives are so often top down. You hear, politicians or news outlets framing the issue, telling you the narrative, but so rarely is it actually just ground level or, community produced narratives. It's talking about their experience, their viewpoint of it. And I think that would be extremely beneficial in just insights on what's happening and then just reframing the issues. And then, yeah, I think Venezuela is at, the center of a lot of the things I talked about, from capitalist desire for, market expansion and oil to also just a distraction from all the other chaos going on. Epstein files possibly. Um, yeah, I don't want to go down a tangent there, but it's very interesting. And now we're building up towards, conflict in Iran as another
Yeah,
distraction and military justification.
yeah, frankly, I'm amazed we got through the weekend without something really starting there. Diane, I'm gonna let you unmute so you can chime in to the conversation. Is it letting you do it? Yeah, there you go.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Owen. This has been great. I'm a longtime Cuba activist and involved with MAPA's Cuba group. And we rarely talk about Cuba here unless I bring it up, but I'm just wondering if you have any comments about what's been going on with U.S.-Cuba relations. And, the other thing I wanted to mention is about USAID, which everybody has been lamenting the loss of. But in terms of Cuba, it was actually a very negative situation, because USAID was giving money to anti-Cuba groups in Florida to undermine all kinds of activities in Cuba. So I don't know if it's anything that you think much about or have an opinion about, but if you do, I'd love you to share some of it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the best person to speak on that, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean it's just, Cuba is a ideologically opposed nation to the US capitalist idea. Um, and so they've just always wanted to control and change that situation to be more aligned with American interests. And Marco Rubio seems to be especially hateful of Cuba.
Mhm.
And I think it's pretty awful what's happening now, and it's going to possibly be a big humanitarian crisis as it goes
It
on.
already is. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to read up on it more. So thank you for encouraging me to do that
Yeah.
and speaking on it.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. And I think Cuba is very much connected to what's happening in Venezuela. The part of what they have done is stop Venezuelan oil from getting to Cuba. So yeah, these things are connected for sure. Thanks for bringing that in. I'm going to need to get us to the end here. I have a few announcements and things to share. So we'll say a thank you right now, visible, and also after I say a few things. And where are we at? Yeah, okay. So first, I do like to remind people that this series is free. It's open to all. It will stay that way. But your support for New Hampshire Peace Action is what helps us keep doing all of the work that we do. nhpeaceaction.org/donate will let you, contribute. Most of our past Monday nights are available on our YouTube channel. I just want to point that out to folks. You can look us up online there. YouTube and New Hampshire Peace Action should get you there. And we really want you to stay in touch with us and come to more events that we are doing. Let me give you a little snapshot of what is coming up right now. And there's a lot coming up, actually. Our vigils for just peace in Palestine continue. Weather permitting, Wednesday, February 25th from 2 to 3 will be at Representative Pappas's office in Dover. Thursday, February 26th, noon to 1, there'll be folks at City Plaza in Concord, New Hampshire. And Wednesday, March 4th, 2 to 3, we will be outside of Senator Shaheen's office in Dover. Other programs in just 2 days, Wednesday, February 11th. Oh, no, that's not right. Doreen's going to help me. What is it, the 26th? This Wednesday. 25th, thank you. Wednesday, February 25th, 7 p.m. via Zoom, we are going to welcome Ambassador Chaz Freeman to join us for part 2 of our Global Power Dynamics series. This time, the focus will be on the Middle East. This Thursday, the next day, February 26th, 7 p.m., we have a New Hampshire Peace Action ACTS night via Zoom, or Action Night, and the focus we expect to be on Iran. Next week, Not in My Name, New Hampshire will host showings of the film Coexistence My Ass. On Tuesday, March 3rd at 7 p.m., they'll be at Red River Theater in Concord, and Wednesday, March 4th, 7 p.m. at 3S Art Space in Portsmouth. Both films will be followed by a question and answer discussion time facilitated by Not in My Name, New Hampshire members. Our next Peace and Justice conversation via Zoom will be Monday, March 9th at 7 p.m. And we're going to be talking with the authors of the new book, Peace Talk, a compendium of hope. One of them lives here in New Hampshire. So that will be really exciting. And I will wrap it up there. Again, I just really want to thank Owen for taking this time and sharing your perspective to know what this rising generation of peace activists is thinking about, how you all are framing things. I know you're not speaking for all of them, but as one in the midst of that, we're really grateful and so glad to be connected to you. It's very inspiring. I think people will agree with me. And visibly, let's thank Owen. And good luck shoveling out. My goodness.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for having me. Really appreciate it.